Alright, so what is up guys? In the previous session we learned about what is user input service as well as user input type. We also learned about two events such as input began and input ended, and we understood the difference between user input service as well as user input type. In this session we're going to be understanding about what is remote events. Here I've written three questions. What is remote events? How do we use remote events? And where do we use remote events? So what are remote events? Basically remote events are a type of instance where you can communicate from the local script to the server script. So let's say if I were to use the user input service, which is only accessible from the local script, and let's say if the player clicks R and then they get 10 coins, and in order to increment the value of coins by 10, we need to use a server script. So here I'll be making a small script. Alright, so here I've created a really small script. I've used the user input service and game process event, then return n. I've checked the enum.keycode equals to R and print increase coins value by 10. So what I want the script to do is that in this workspace I've created an int value called coins, and I want the value of these coins to increase by 10 every time the player clicks R. And the script for increasing the coins value by 10 I've created in the server script by using the local function coin increment coins.value plus equals to 10. And coins is a variable which holds the data game.workspace. Wait for child coins. Alright, so here in order to connect this local script to the server script, I'll be using something called as RemoteEvent. And the place where you create the instance called RemoteEvent will be in the replicated storage. You can create it anywhere else, but I suggest you guys to put it in the replicated storage because it's like a storage for the server. So whatever things you don't want to see in the game, but it's in the behind, like in the storage of the server, that's where you put in the replicated storage. So the remote event goes in the replicated storage. I'll be renaming this as coins increment. Alright, so here I've created a variable called coins increment with the data game get service replicated storage wait for child coins increment. So in order to make this remote event, there's something called as fire and OnServerEvent or OnClientEvent. So whenever you're firing, you'll be firing from the client side or the server side. In this case, we'll be firing from the client side, and in order to do that, I'll be just writing coins increment with the colon and FireServer. It's basically like this, and I'll be just writing a print statement here. Remote event fire. And after firing this coins increment, in order to get this, whatever this is fired from the server script, again I'll be just copying this remote event, pasting in the server script. And in order to get the fired remote event, like the action that has been fired, we'll be using something called as coin increment dot on server event connect function and coin increment. Yeah, so that was basically it, and this is on server event. If you're doing from the client side, it will be like this: coins increment dot on client event connect function and whatever you can write, whatever code you want in this. That's only if you're firing from the server side, but in this case we are firing from the client side. That's why we are using FireServer. If you're firing from the server side, we'll be using coins increment FireClient or FireClients, all clients. Yeah. So if I were to run this, let me just print out the value of coins every time it gets increased. And if I were to run this, alright, so I just clicked R and it says remote event fired 10. If I click R again, it says 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Alright, so that was basically remote event, the usage of remote event from the client side to the server side. Basically what we are doing is we are trying to communicate from the client side and sending the message or the firing of the remote event to the server side. Next part, we're going to be understanding how to fire from the server side to the client side. Alright, so here I've written a really small code snippet with the conditional statement being if coins.value less than equals to 100, then print fired for night method, change port FireClient, game get service place, wait for child, night method. So keep in mind, this is the server side, okay? So server side, what I mean is that it's a normal script instead of server script service. Let me just delete this real quick. Yeah, so if I were to go to server side, so this is basically firing client from the server side. What we are trying to do is that we are trying to send a message from the server side to the client side. In order to do that, there are two ways. One of the ways is FireClient, and the second way is FireAllClients. So if you were to fire a client like a specific player, then we use FireClient, and in the arguments we'll be typing out the specific player instance. So here I've written night method, game get service players wait for child night method. And if we were to fire for every single player in the game, that's where we use FireAllClients. I'll just put it in comments so if you can, for you guys to understand what is going on here. And in the local side, I'll be using the same variable, change pod color. By the way, I created another remote event inside of the replica storage called as change pod color. Keep in mind about that as well. And to get the fired change pod color from the server side to the local side, local script, we'll be using OnClientEvent. Connect formation, and I will just create a pod here, and this will be the base pod. Let me type it as base, not base. Let me just type it as base. Alright, so in this local script, I've written change pod color dot OnClientEvent. As you know, for the client side of the local script, we'll be using OnClientEvent, and for the server script, we'll be using OnServerEvent, which is right here. So keep in mind about this. In order to receive the message from the client side, we'll be using OnClientEvent. I've written the code as workspace find first child base.color. I've created a new instance called as pod inside of the workspace and renamed it to base.color, color 3 from RGB mat.random to 0,255 mat.random 0,245. So what this does is that it chooses a color randomly with the RGB value from 0 to 255. So the maximum is 255 and minimum is 0. So it chooses a random value. So let's say it can be like 16, 17, 200, and chooses a color for that. If I were to run this, alright, so I just clicked R, it says remote event fired, 10 fired for night method. If I click R again, it changes the color to blue, red, maroon, purple. So it keeps changing, it's again the same. So the reason why it was not changing the color is because in the if statement, I've written if coins.value less than 100. Since it exceeded 100, it's not changing or firing change pod color remote event. That's why it's not changing the color of the pod. So another way to do this is by using FireAllClients. It's the same thing, but the difference between FireClient and FireAllClients is that FireClient fires only for a specific player, and you need to mention which client you want to fire by putting in this argument. Okay, FireAllClients does not require any arguments. So that means that you'll be firing for every single client. Alright, so another thing you can do is that you can put something called as arguments instead of this FireServer hello, and the argument I put is the text hello. In order to receive the text, we can use the parameter by just putting, let's say, a variable called as text, and the text that we have fired is hello, and I'll be just printing text. So that's one way to use parameters and arguments instead of the remote events from FireServer to OnServerEvent. Just put the argument here, the parametric variable, and here will be the arguments. We can even put variables such as, let's say, coins, increment, or any sort of value of an instance such as int value, boolean value, and whatsoever. We can even pass player instances from the player service to the FireServer, and the same thing you can do for when firing the client side. And here you can just, I can click something as high, and in order to get this high, the text high, I'll be just putting a parametric variable called as text, and I can just print text. So that was basically it about remote events. Summarizing what we have learned in today's video, So what are remote events? Remote events are a way to communicate between the server side or the client side, and it's only a one way. You cannot communicate from the server side and the client side and client side to the server side at the same time. You can't do that, okay? So keep in mind about that. And how do we use it? We use it using from, like, if you were to fire from the local script, we'll be using FireServer, and in order to receive that fired remote event from the local script, we'll be using OnServerEvent, and vice versa for the firing from server script, which is FireClient or FireAllClients. We'll be getting the fired variable or the fired remote event into the local script using the OnClientEvent. So please don't get confused about this OnServerEvent and OnClientEvent. Usually beginners, they get quite confused about this and they mess up with the FireClient, and in the server script they write it as, you know, FireServer, or I don't know what. So don't get confused about that. Where do we use it? We put the instance, the remote event instance, inside of the replica storage. That's quite highly suggested from my side. You can put it anywhere else, server storage or whatsoever, but I recommend you guys to put in the replica storage. And kindly rename your remote events. Don't keep it as remote event. Change the name to something which you like or suits you. So that was basically it for today's video. If you guys have any doubts, queries, questions or whatsoever, kindly comment down. Till then, stay safe. Bye bye.